Sup Shredders, my name is Logan, aka Spiderhands, and welcome to an SP Reacts, where today we got ourselves an album, a playlist, a mixtape from TrueBenevolence titled The Incredible Chronicles of Benjamin Finglebottom. And if we switch over to here, we got ourselves a very intense art here with SpongeBob and Patrick there looking super thug. With the fingerer, we're going to listen through each of these 5 tracks from start till finish, and we're going to hear what we think. Let's do it, let's go.
TrueBenevolence, you're making me nut.
This beat making me trans.
Yeah. The day Big Bad Bang came,
Yeah. My grandma said she loves me, that wasn't true. She cut my balls off before I nutted, sticky as glue. Tried to hide the pain I was feeling. Gave shrooms to the spade kids, they ass was stimming. Provided from the homeless, gave free blunts out, turns out was laced with hummus. As I saw the bumps tweak and their lungs burn. Fella hand tapped me as my life took a turn. Big Bad Benny was smirking, making fun of me. As she saw my balls drip, the blood.
It's kind of
it was just beginning
dissonant, isn't it? It's a challenging listen.
Big Bad Benny! No! No!
I'm Big Bad Ben. I live in your head. I nut in your butt. And spraying your jet. I'ma hide in your closet. Rip off your balls. Make your girl cheat on you. And give you a massage.
oh, no, Ben's coming. Guys, run!
Okay, I did like that actually. That was an interesting journey that we had there. So the first track there, that was the fingerer. And I assume that this first track, so in each of these post-track sections, I'm going to provide an overall song analysis of everything from vocals and lyrics all the way through to studio production, as well as any applicable constructive critique. And then finally, my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. We'll also be doing an overall analysis of these tracks at the end. Before we go any further, what do we think this track is about? I think this track is about Benjamin Finglebottom kind of being like the person or the demon or whatever that you say the name 3 times and suddenly they smash through a window next to you. There is a lot said here. There's I assume the kind of lower pitched modulated vocals that are Benjamin Finglebottom. And it's super kind of perverted and uncomfortable to listen to. It's very creepy. It's trying to sort of present that way. And you have the other people that are involved in this audio horror film, and they're effectively about to have a terrible time, I do like the acting in it. I think that it's quite interesting to have that. The way that the vocals went from side to side there was kind of neat with the panning decisions and stuff like that. There's a bit of kind of randomness there with the making me trans part around the 12 second mark there that I'm not entirely sure how that kind of comes into everything, but I think the main journey we're having is learning more about Benjamin Finglebottom. And I just suppose we'll just have to see what we have next and the rest of the 4 songs. But ultimately, I think when you take the vocals into account, it's less about trying to sing well or rap well. I think there are some rapped components in there occasionally, but it's almost kind of avant-garde in its approach to making a lot of different vocal samples and lines kind of coalesce into a 1:45 piece. You have screams on the right side of the stereo field there, as well as car horns that are very loud. And I listen to it and I think, why do we have those things? But ultimately, I feel like it's more for effect. Maybe they're trying to sort of do jump scares. And I think that ultimately it's unpredictable. And if you need music to constantly keep you engaged, this is probably the track for you. I think that if you move past all the different vocal takes, the scream parts, the spoken parts, the kind of modulated parts from Benjamin Finglebottom, you have a track here at 1:45. It is nice and short, it's chapterized, there's a mixture of different, very subtle instrumental components. There's horns, there's, again, the vocal leads that kind of take you through it. And it's done in a way where The background music, the accompaniment of like the drums and the kind of dissonant guitar parts and everything are deliberately kind of like slamming against each other in a way that kind of seems a bit gross on purpose. I think it's sort of to represent maybe the mania or the kind of craziness that's going on within the situation that they're in. It sounds like kind of mildly sort of like almost like paranoid in Bart's. There's this kind of neat little sort of swing groove with the shuffle that you've got the hi-hats in the background there that kind of occurs throughout quite a lot of it, and that's kind of cool within itself. There's another kind of Reese's kind of saying the wow, wow, like playing a fun sort of melody there, which in isolation sounds good. You have some kind of glitchy sounding guitar elements and other bits there which just sound a little bit abrasive and uncouth. And I think it could work well within certain genres of music. It's just that when you have them all together at the same time, it's almost like they're deliberately articulated in a way where they're not in the same key signature, and therefore are kind of banging up against each other in a way that I can only imagine is deliberate. You have at the start though, before we get into that, because the track does kind of develop as we go through it before we do the final sort of transfer with the glass breaking, it's a very subtle drum beat there. So I think if anything, even if we're just using kind of loops and sort of like making the vocals the focal point, there are still some interesting rhythmic decisions that are being made within this. And even though again the vocals are arguably more important than any sort of chord progression or sort of main theme or anything like that, aside from it simply being more of a unconventional sort of like through composed or experimental piece, you kind of just feel like you absolutely feel like you do not know what's going to happen next, aside from it being unpredictable and maybe a little bit sort of like avant-garde. I do, just real quickly, just before we finish off though, I do like the fact that we had those keys at the start, even though they seemed a little bit sort of disconnected from the rhythm that was put forward by the drums there, and I'm not sure how they represented what we were trying to discuss in the rest of it, maybe a point of tension or like a horror film soundtrack or something like that. It's just nice to have different tones and textures instrumentally within this piece, even if they're quite quiet. Studio production, recording, mixing, and mastering, there's just a phenomenal amount of dynamic range to this. Things are not the same loudness. There's a huge difference between the quiet and loud parts. And so ultimately you have a very sort of dramatic experience with listening through this piece. The vocal takes when they come in are either unproduced or they're again processed in a way where you're meant to sort of go down there, and you have those sort of movements around with the panning around the stereo field, which is kind of neat. I kind of dig the way it floats around. There's a lot of music nowadays where people are sort of paranoid about moving the vocals around too much, but it can be especially unsettling when it goes from side to side. You're like chasing it around like the thoughts in your head. It's very sort of unsettling. But ultimately, you know, quite creative in that regard. There are some parts where it again, with there's automation of like that horn sound earlier on within the track as well, with the volume, which sort of insinuates that we're aware of that kind of post-production stuff as well. So I feel like we're making good progress with what we're doing here, even if it might not be a track for everyone. But yeah, we've got a track number 2, Front Seat Freestyle. Let's do it, interlude. I don't actually mind it too much.
Yeah. Try to talk to the hoes, got my fit right, spit some wide sail. Like Thugger, my teeth white, got smelling good, but I gotta tell the story how my got my ball snatched and sent straight to hell. He been looking for me, put his nose in the air, he was trying to sniff, trying to smell. He smelled the doo-doo crust on my left cheek.
Fuck's sake. Yeah, that got me.
I talk to the shawties, my dick so hard it started to leak. Pull my pants down, spoil my 3D's vert, man, I look like a clown. I couldn't hold it in. I nutted. Saw my nut fly in the air, it was red and sticky. Spat in the girl's eyes, she felt hard. Embarrassed, I pulled out the blicky. Pulled from my ass the pool, had a fat ass lard and some Tukey pieces in the barrel. I fired the hose, the bullets brown and nasty, that shit was feral.
I mean, like, what can you say to that? Effectively, front seat freestyle. I assume either they're kind of freestyling off the top of their head about the lived experience they've had, or they had that experience whilst they were in the front seat. I mean, I don't know. It's clearly about, you know, sexual misadventures and then some sort of like fetish stuff or something along those lines. It's a wild ride with that track. And yeah, it's very rare that a track kind of breaks me a little bit halfway through, but it's just so blunt. and what it's trying to accomplish. And this the best part about it is that there's this sort of kind of surreal beat behind it where you're just kind of listening through it and you're like, damn man, where are we going with this, right? Where are we going with this? I honestly feel like that was far less of a kind of a musically confusing experience in the previous track. You could understand there with the interlude that it was its own sort of isolated concept. The words came through clearly for the most part there. You know, definitely not stuff that's for kids. Music doesn't need to be. It's explicit, but like, you know, in a way where it's just obtusely so. And even though it doesn't sound like a comfortable situation for them, I still think they're having fun with it. The track at like 1 minute 20 or something like that is nice and short. The vocals when they came through with the nutted part going onto the side a lot louder as well, it's just very sort of like, whoa, you know, a big thing happened. There was a consequence. There was like, you know, drama, an event, a surprise, you know, an unfortunate surprise. And you've just, you know, behind the kind of variety of different cadences and rhythms that the vocalist puts forward as a freestyle with a kind of like deadpan, kind of like voicing and expression to it. You've just got those wow, wow, wow. There's almost like reverse taked kind of like cloud drumish kind of feel there that is kind of simultaneously hypnotic in its approach, where it's just very kind of self-evident and sort of mysterious sounding, like lulling you into a false sense of security. But it almost is so neutral once you get used to it that you're just sitting there kind of listening to the guy talk about this stuff, and it almost has like a layer of disbelief to it. The drums in the background are very typical for this kind of modern sort of hip hop and rap kind of like style of music there. The kind of clicky hi-hats, the kicks and the snares and stuff like that, rims. And I feel like, again, if we're doing a freestyle track, the drums are you know, relevant and effective for the short form factor that we had there. They're a nice sort of way to sort of keep track of groove, especially as a vocalist. Occasionally would start in a sort of less kind of like on the beat sort of part there, or even outside of syncopation. And basically you kind of go between those different instrumental components there, not necessarily including much more than that, but enough to sort of get us by. And we have this kind of gentle fade out at the end there with this second chapter to the adventure there. It's like a minor leaning to the key signature there, where it's like, yeah, okay, we've had a terrible time. It makes sense that we're kind of resolving it to a less positive sort of like musical connotation. And I think, again, the mystery to the tones and texture of the instruments involved sort of like leave more to be said about it, even though you've kind of heard as much as you might want to about it. Studio recording, mixing and mastering, ultimately I do feel that's done pretty well here. I think you can hear the vocals clearly for the most part. The drums are nice and filtered in a way where they're not too kind of like bombastic within the mix. Those kind of reverse takes on those cloud drums, or like the melodic parts there, or harmonic bits, are good. They follow through, and it's a short track, so they don't overstay their welcome. There's a natural kind of build from the start, and then we come down there, and ultimately we're in and out very, very quickly. So yeah, effectively, that's the track, number 2 there. At this point, I think it's just, you're still left in a position where these are 2 different songs so far, and that means that the rest is going to be a bit of a kind of like, I suppose, you just never know what's coming next. Yeah, we have a bit sad Bart Simpson pick.
Street name you built yourself from ripping people's balls off. But who are you really? What lies beneath Big Bad? And who are you, Benjamin?
I don't know anymore. I don't know anymore. It all started with my first rip. Snatched that shit, ripped it right off. Ever since then, I ain't been the same. I became the monster I feared. I repeated the cycle of hatred with my kids. I am the monster. Help me. I can't get my words out.
Whose balls did you snatch, Benjamin? Finglebottom? Whose?
It was my grandson. I ripped off my grandson's balls. He didn't know it was me, but I did. I grabbed it, squeezed it, and ripped. He started bleeding from his pelvis.
How did it feel to rip off your sperm, right from his body?
It was ecstasy. Ecstasy. That's why it's so hard to turn away, turn a new leaf. I have to, but I just can't. No, I can't. I can't. And you'll be next.
Benjamin, no!
You're next.
No!
You're next.
Please!
You're next.
My wife!
That was so, like, I saw it coming with the scream at the end. I saw it coming. Like, yeah, it's such a surreal story and just so refreshingly unique. There are just there is so much self-serious music out there. And I listened to this and it's just a really silly story. You know, it's just, I know, again, clearly if you kind of take it on the nose and you're like, yeah, this is a story that's, you know, like about someone talking about ripping their grandson's balls off. Like, clearly that's kind of fucked up. But like, just from the perspective of someone who on a daily basis reviews music, listens to a lot of music where it's very kind of, oh, I understand why that exists. So that's a, you know, and not to downplay that. It's just like an oasis in the desert, hearing something that kind of takes me by surprise at this stage. I listened to this and it's just a really interesting conversation between the person who was interrogating Benjamin and Benjamin themselves, talking about how they're perpetuating the cycle of hatred and how they regret what they've done, but they'll never stop. And then there's that massive scream at the end where Big Bad Ben attacks them. And I get it. You can follow along to it. And it's clear and it makes sense. It's not subject matter that's going to resonate with everyone, but I kind of dig the creativity objectively involved within it. The vocal performance as well, you know, going between the main types and then like the modulated vocals, it makes sense now. And you can kind of hear similarities and connections between tracks throughout this record that do objectively make sense. And you know, you're left thinking, how could we improve this? And I think that outside of, again, the spoken parts and the scream and how visceral that was, and I think the lo-fi sound to the microphones that you have throughout this process kind of add more to the vibe of it. But then, of course, you have this situation where the keys and the background just structurally through this composed part are just, they sound bad. They sound like kind of uncomfortable and dissonant, and these note choices that we're making are clearly sort of almost trying to antagonize the listener with how off-putting they are. They elicit this feeling of innate tension and discomfort because you've got these flat notes or these sort of like flat second intervals going on where they're playing two keys chromatically next to each other, and they're deliberately not trying to sound good, which makes sense when you hear what's going on in the conversation it's had. So innately, there is just this combination between those two elements, and you have this sad string, the violin or the cello going on in the background, adding to a further sense of heaviness with it, without needing to be too literal about adding the heaviness with like the bass or the drums or anything like that. And when you have that scream at the end, the strings rise up at that point, and everything kind of sounds like it's crescendoing there. So I actually have to say this is probably my favorite track, like unironically, off of these three so far. I think that there is a connection between, I'm assuming what was the title of it? Sad Bart Simpson pick is more representing the guy being sad about what he did, but then there's a twist. It's like kind of like the meme kind of thing. But then of course you have outside of that, the story makes sense with the chords, makes sense with the context of it. Thematically minor or even diminished or flat second chromatics, they're very sort of like just uncomfortable chords. They're meant to make you feel a sense of danger or stress, which again, subject matter makes sense. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering there. I think that if you'd had this track over compressed or done to commercial grade, it just would have sounded a bit less authentic and believable in the weirdest sense. You have a consistent like quality of vocal modulation and processing the previous parts with a weird sort of reverb on those Ben's voice as well. And then when the scream comes in, because there is so much room for it to go louder, it does, and it shocks you in a way where it almost makes you question some of the thoughts I had about the first track because of how deliberate this one is. It makes me kind of question how I think about this as a whole, you know. But I'm actually keen to hear more. I want to know how this ends. So we got Big Bad Ben.
TrueBenevolence just gave me herpes.
That bitch boy owe me money, so I ripped his balls off. He tried to run away, so I sucked him in his jaw. That clean ass head left his brain all shake. And then I bent him over, and he got.
Yeah, I just punched him.
How are you doing that? How are they doing that, Big Bad Ben? Is that like, that's a serious amount of voice modulation going on there. They're doing some crazy stuff with the fixed chains. They definitely are synthesizing it.
Is this what you wanted? Is this what you wanted?
Hold up, wait a minute, Big Bang coming through. Ain't no need to run, I'm a changed man, boo. You know how to dance, so come on, go show it off. You know how to dance, so come on, go show it off.
Like, unironically, that was like some of that was really good. Some of Big Bad Ben was really cool. Again, you had the screams and the kind of shouting vocals where I think Big Bad Ben is just given up on feeling guilty about what they're up to, and they're fully committing to the bit now, you know. And you have this initially kind of extremely raw vocal style where we're just screaming into the microphone there, and then we talk for a second, someone else talks to him, and then they talk about punching him, and then they're back in. But then we go into this like heavily auto-tuned kind of stylized vocal style there with these kind of surreal these vocal takes that sound like a synthesizer, and it's just so into the mix there that we have these wonderful lush synths come up with that brown. Like I really genuinely dig the tone of those synth pads when they come in. To have the vocals actually kind of have a sensible kind of is the cadence to follow there, the flow in that last section with the driving drum groove for like the small amount of time we had it was fantastic. Like, it was really cool, man. And like, it's just a track where there is so much contrast out of what I think the track is about, and the vocal performances there, because you have some rap parts, some screamed parts, some like we talk about, is this what you wanted, as if to say, did you want a different kind of music? Did you want something a bit more kind of like more typical maybe of what people might expect in terms of hip hop vocals? It's extreme. And I have to admit, when he was screaming into the microphone, it didn't feel entirely comfortable. It was just like a little bit too much for me personally. It's not that it was like intimidating or whatever, it's more that it just seemed almost actually, it just seemed like an amount of anger that with the clipping of the microphone did seem like we were actually genuinely angry. And it was like believable, I suppose. When you have in the background a through composed piece like this with varying different sort of ambiences and angles that we're cutting there, especially with the 808s, the drums at the start during that section where we are absolutely just blowing ourselves up, basically, you know. There's a sense of menace to the way we kind of ride that root note there with the thump of those like filtered drums. And like everything is quite clipped and distorted and kind of ferocious in its approach. And we have these kind of plucks or plonks that coming around like the 535 mark there, which kind of make more sense once you've heard the entire song, because you then go into those kind of like stylized vocal parts there, and things kind of go a lot more colorful at that stage. But earlier on, it's almost like it's a difficult transition into that. But I kind of feel like we could have done an entire thing with that bow, bow, and the tones. We could have potentially had done more with that part, you know. When we have the last sort of 10 or 15 seconds though, I kind of got confused there. The vocals kind of went into this sort of ethereal kind of like pattern where you had like horns there and you had vocals kind of fluttering out in the upper range. And we have the keys there that are almost kind of meditative in contrast to that, you know, that kind of sitting there very sort of poignantly, delicately on that right hand, playing single notes there is a much less sort of like complicated contrast to a lot of those elements sort of swirling around angrily. And it just kind of goes from a point where I was really sort of vibing the way that it presented itself to a point of confusion again going into Scatinizer track number 5. I understand the journey we're having with this track, but I also don't. But I think that's okay. Either way, it's another interesting piece that, you know, there has been thought put into it. Thematically, minor leaning. Even when we go, I mean, to be fair, it's majorish when we go into the kind of synthy parts there, but ultimately it's a wild roller coaster ride. I think it's more trying to sort of like start with a frustration, then eventually trying to capitulate to what they think the audience wants, even if it's ironically so. Studio recording, mixing and mastering, the thump of things when there aren't so intense, that it's clearly deliberate. There's bit crushing and distortion and reverb tails and heavy sort of like processing of some of the vocal layers and stuff like that to get them to harmonize like they do in the later sections. And it's just, it's intriguing to be honest there. It's not your typical song. We're not trying to make sensible decisions here. We're trying to make decisions that effectively will elevate the listening experience, at least for the people who are making it. But also kind of, I suppose, continue to be intriguing for anyone else who's paying attention to it. But yeah, plenty of dynamic range, similar comments from previous parts of the track. And the album, to be fair, the Incredible Chronicles of Benjamin Finglebottom. We have track number 5 though. Titled Scatinizer coming up here. There you go.
My grandma cut my balls. My grandma cut my balls. It's gone.
Wow. Your grandma cut off your balls? Your grandma a hoe. Your grandma a hoe. Your grandma a hoe.
I hope we're not gonna go quiet and into another scream.
Weebity wobbity weebity what? What did you say about my grandma? You better watch your mouth, you nigga. You nigga. Cause that nigga like you give me talking about my grandma. I was up my whole dick down your face. Down your face, down your face. And your tongue will be touching my tip. Touching my tip, touching my tip.
Your tip probably small as hell. Small as hell, small as hell. Your tip top small as hell. You got low testosterone. Testosterone. Your balls don't even exist.
Pit poppity bop 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 wow. Your mama's pussy sags to the flow. Saggy pussy, saggy pussy.
No. Fuck that! What do you say about my mom?
Huh?
What do you say?
I say your mom pussy
So
sag,
in other words, you
nigga.
wanna fight? Is that it? You wanna fight? We can go right now.
Hey, let's
Fuck
step
this
outside,
scat
pussy
shit.
nigga. Let's
we
go.
can run the ones.
Bitch ass
right
nigga.
here, right now. Let's get it.
I'll switch your ass down,
bitch.
nigga.
Run the ones. Right here.
Bet, bro, I don't give a fuck about this scat shit. Come on, nigga.
Fuck it. What are we doing, man? So we had 4 tracks where you could kind of understand where they related to Benjamin Finglebottom. But then we just have 2 different vocalists at the end kind of just spitting on a microphone and making stuff up and doing some scatting over top of the jazz lines. They talk about their grandmothers and their mothers and low testosterone and a whole bunch of other things there. And then they eventually get to a point where they decide to front to each other and they step outside and they don't care about the scatting stuff, and then the song's done. That's effectively how the Incredible Chronicles of Benjamin Finglebottom go, and we're done. The vocals in this go between softer parts to louder parts. We play some interesting sort of onomatopoeic, rhythmic, kind of like sung or spoken parts, and on top of that kind of line of double basses and stuff like that in the low end. And you have like hi-hat closes and amongst those bass lines. And you know, it's very sort of like fragrant outside of the vocals. The vocals is a lead because there's not as much of a kind of a narrative to it that I can follow along to there. It's still like you don't know what's going to happen next, and so you're kind of waiting to see how things close, but it is maybe a bit less connected to other tracks. So effectively, I kind of leave this record in a state of not being totally sure what all of it collectively means. But regardless, outside of that, I think, again, like having a different vocal style where the scatting was kind of neat, as we've had like rapped and some sort of sung parts before this. And the track at around 2 minutes is quite well fleshed out, I suppose. It's a song where you listen through it, you understand what we were trying to accomplish with this. It's got a sort of a twist ending, and you know, like, again, I feel like the double bass was played quite well through this. The kind of loop that was very satisfying to listen through. It was neutral enough to allow whatever we wanted to do on the different vocal parts. It was submissive to the vocals in the sense that it was clearly not trying to be too sort of like prominent. It was like a very sort of like low-key ground bed for it. And like, I think as we get to a close, it almost becomes more about the people than like the music itself, which is totally fine, which makes sense. We lose track of the scat and we're mostly focused on each other at that stage. So, I mean, outside of the minor leaning to the key signature, the rhythmic phrasing on the chord notes, the double bass dancing around and the hi-hat closes, nothing else really occurs instrumentally. It's just you have that connection with the vocals to the title, to the style. And I think minor leaning, I suppose, just sounds cool a lot of the time with the key signature, but also considering that they ended up finding at the end, maybe having like a more kind of like minor leaning to it, even with it being sort of like very sort of chill jazz, maybe it makes more sense with the aggression involved. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering. The vocals are the similar kind of quality we've had to previous parts of the album or the record or the mixtape, where it has simply been just a case of, again, like creating a very sort of like subtle atmosphere for the vocals to make sense on, because I wanted to sort of like have a go at doing that and sort of try that out and try something different at the end point. And we're left with an understanding of stylistically how they connect, but also a lack of trying to maybe have too much cohesion over the entirety of the album, aside from some of the innate randomness that's involved. Ultimately, there are no issues itself with the mixing within this, considering the precedent we said beforehand, and we're going to talk about these tracks more as a whole in the conclusion. Because welcome to the conclusion of my review of these tracks from an act named TrueBenevolence. It's off of the Incredible Chronicles of Benjamin Finglebottom EP. Or album, I suppose. I'm not sure which. In this section, we're going to provide an overall analysis of these tracks, from lyrics and vocals all the way through to studio production, as well as any applicable constructive critique, and then finally, my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But first of all, what do we think this track is about? I think effectively, to summarize what the Incredible Chronicles of Benjamin Finglebottom is about, it's about someone who is sort of grossly perverted through the life they'd had before, and when they're put in a position where they need to atone for their crimes, with them basically being the boogeyman of their universe, they are put in a position where they both acknowledge the mistakes that they made, but then also go on this like quest of, actually, I don't care anymore, I'm just going to do it regardless. As in, they give in to their impulses, they burn everything down around them, and then you know, there's a lot of balls that are stolen, and then effectively it's just a track where you end with Scatinizer, just two people kind of riffing off of each other, having fun with music, and at the end they get into a fight when one person goes too far. That's effectively my take with this. I think ultimately you also have FrontseatFreestyle, which is just, it's implicitly explicit, and it's about, you know, catching the scent of something and it getting you very sort of like elevated to a point where you can't control yourself. It's an interesting experience listening through this. I wasn't sure what to expect going into it, but honestly, at the very least, you can appreciate the creativity involved with this. They clearly had fun doing it. The vocals across the board, whether they were spoken or sung or stylized or meta-tuned or sort of like vocoded or sort of like put down an octave for Benjamin's vocal parts, the kind of scatting that we had in the Scatinizer as well as everything else, they were done in a way where there were moments where it sounded tight. There were moments where it sounded deliberate, where they sounded like they were kind of taking it more seriously and trying to sort of communicate a certain way, and it was very, very good. Other times it was clearly more sort of like relaxed and sort of fun. They weren't trying to be too sort of like pedantic about sort of like hitting things a certain way. They just wanted to sort of tell the story I wanted to in their own way, and it was very sort of free form and organic. Ultimately, I feel like there were enough different voicings and different tones and textures throughout this to keep each of these tracks intriguing, even for people who are not necessarily massive fans of the content, and that's totally fine either way. You know, people are going to have different preferences. Ultimately though, if you like the first track, you're probably going to like all 5 of them. The tracks were typically you know, between 1 minute to like 2 and a bit. And I feel like that's a good length for these. There are chapters within a broader concept there that didn't need to be over explained. In amongst the screaming and talking and whispering and breathing sounds and other parts we had which performed similar kind of like interesting rhythmic occurrences within the piece, you had tracks which had a variety of different instruments. There were kind of strings and keys and drums. Drums were a big one within this. We had a mixture of different kick, snare, and cymbal patterns. We even had some sort of tom fills occasionally, such as in the fourth track, if I'm not mistaken there. Some tracks were extremely minimalist with the percussion, such as the fifth song, where we inevitably and invariably just had hi-hat closes for it. And I kind of dig that. There are rare moments where, like, in the second track, for example, you know, you had this kind of groove that was continued throughout the entirety of it, and you could more easily follow along to what the vocalist was trying to establish. There were other moments where the drums almost seemed like an accident, and we simply had them there as a kind of a way to sort of push things forward without them necessarily being too kind of like provocative. The basses that we had, though, typically sort of like, there weren't many of them, to be fair. I mean, there was literally a double bass, to be fair, and Scatinizer, but there were some tracks where simply had these kind of cloud drums kind of reverse takes, such as the second song, and it was very kind of like mysterious sounding as opposed to being too sort of like abrupt or demanding in terms of the frequency spectrum. I think like a lot of this was simply more about choosing sounds and sort of switching the position of people's sort of like attentions. Like with the first track, we had the vocals going from side to the center and stuff. We had screams on this side. We had random like horn sounds and everything like that. It was very kind of, oh, this is a thing. Oh, that's a thing, you know? So I think the way to approach talking about instruments within this track, especially with track 3, for example, there are some moments where the instruments are deliberate in the way that they like play things in a sort of a discordant, dissonant way, where we had like, you know, diminished chords, or we had like flat seconds or something like that. But a lot of what was going on within this music was meant to sort of be more like, hey, isn't that a funny thing? Or isn't that like a kind of an uncomfortable sound? It's very literal in its approach there. And I feel that's totally fine. It did well enough to communicate the mood in many situations, including against Scatinizer, where it was kind of scattered over the mic. So usually you could listen to the track, understand why we were playing those instruments, even if they were played in a way which wasn't, you know, conventionally attractive. And, you know, especially with the first one, we had so much going on in different parts and different key signatures which kind of clashed, it were kind of gritty sounding at times. It was meant to sort of elicit a feeling of discomfort there. And I think that it was kind of, you know, the vocals were not subtle in how they approached things. The music was equally as unsubtle. And so you have a music where it's created, I think, to definitely kind of affect you in certain ways. I think that's why you had the variances and different levels of intensity and personality within vocal parts as well, which, you know, is nonetheless literally effective in part because of, again, how deliberate it is. Nonetheless, ultimately, there are moments where we sort of explore interesting chord progressions, such as for some of those synth parts in track number 4. I like those parts at the end. There were things kind of flourished there and were very sort of bright and pretty. I liked how the bass part kind of moved around a little bit in track 5. The old bass part, I liked some of those reverse take cloud drum parts in track 2. And I even liked when things were not well behaved and we had like guitars and sort of like synths and re-synths and drums and stuff and strings and like track 4 and all that. Ultimately, you just have this kind of mishmash and amalgamation of all these different elements there that appear in different times for different moods. Thematically, typically minor. There were some songs like the first which didn't have a key signature really, but ultimately we were trying to sort of communicate, if not overly subtly, a feeling of sort of stress and tension through it there. Even if some songs were different in different parts, they're primarily to sort of maybe even celebrate the commitment to the bit in terms of how we want to move forward from Benjamin into track 4. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering was interesting. I know I've been like relatively gentle with the way that I've been discussing it. I think that the reason for that is I can hear that the mic isn't like a U87 or something like that. So you know that they're kind of working with what they've got in terms of resources, and they do come pretty clear for the most part. I do like some of the vocal modulation and the stylization. I think it's quite creative. The way things are pitched up and down and sort of harmonized and stuff like that. I listen to it and go, you know, like, Are the other instruments well positioned? And truth be told, the other instruments are typically kind of low in the mix. I'm not sure whether they're like instruments that I've produced or recorded where they've got like samples and loops to kind of put in there within these tracks. Either way, you know, typically things are well connected. You can hear them well enough, but the vocals are almost always the focal point, especially when you have those screams in certain parts or like the horn sounds and stuff and moments of drama and sort of like intensity there. It's got enough dynamic range for there to be jump scares. And I think that some of the parts have also been EQ'd and sort of filtered in a way where they're deliberately sort of washed out to sort of make it a bit more sort of lo-fi, which is an interesting concept. Ultimately though, are nice and loud when it needs to be. Not all the time, but when they want it to be loud, it's loud. Bus compression limiting is handled. And I just think some of the bit crushing and distortion we have in certain elements is again a very sort of like deliberate thing that adds a sense of sort of further tension to it in a way, which ultimately is musically satisfying, even if a bit stressful. No applicable real constructive critique from me. Primarily because I can understand, I think, what they're trying to accomplish with this track. From a final general listener's perspective, this has just been one of the more sort of unique sort of projects I've listened to in quite a while. There were parts of it that I really enjoyed, parts of it that I feel like I'm a little bit too old for, parts of it that sort of like got me thinking, and ultimately I feel like that's what you can ask for. Ultimately, I wish everyone all the best of luck in future, but thank you for watching my review of this track from an actor named TrueBenevolence. These tracks are off of, should I say, the incredible chronicles of Benjamin Finglebottom, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via the various social medias and YouTube page, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as you need the help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next SB Reacts. Spiderhands out.